canonicity, transmission, and translation, and we're at a point next Sunday where we're going to start actually getting to the King James Bible itself and where it came from, how it was put together, and some of those subjects. So that's kind of where we're going next Sunday. So there'll be notes next Sunday. Sylvia, are you still okay? I should have probably asked you that privately, but sorry about that. So we'll have notes next Sunday, and we're going to get rolling again with that class, okay? So throughout the summer, we've had a number of different men that have talked about a lot of different topics, and I've just sort of filled in as there was openings in that calendar. Last week, I wasn't supposed to teach, but somebody had to cancel because of things going on in their family, etc. So what I've been doing this summer when it's been my opportunity to teach is I've been updating people on the research that I did some years back on Codex Cyanaticus and whether or not Codex Cyanaticus was a 19th century forgery. So I'm on the church website right now, and we have this whole section, for those of you that are online, A Tale of Two Constantines Rethinking Codex Cyanaticus, and this goes all the way back to June of 2017. So remember, guys that have been here, in 2017, that book by David Sorensen came out, Neither Oldest Nor Best, and I read it, and then that touched off a whole series of research that I did, reading basically a ton of books and material that's came out, and I talked about this in our Sunday school hour here back in 2017. Then in 2018, I was asked to talk about this. Where'd it go? I was asked to talk about this at the Pastors Conference in Chicago, and I'm not seeing it. Here it is. I brought two studies there about Codex Sinaiticus or Codex Simonides, understanding how the text of the Reformation was undermined, and then some essays and research came out that was critical of the 19th century forgery view. Most notably, a review of forging of Codex Sinaiticus by Dr. William Cooper against a detailed background of the discovery of the Codex. So that's this essay right here, as well as three others that I left at home because I wasn't planning on talking about them. So then that information was put into my hands in January of 2019. So I kind of pumped the brakes on this topic for a while, for about 2 years, 2.5 years really, because there was enough stuff that was raised in these essays that gave me pause about whether or not things I had said were true or not. And so I wanted to see what developed out there as this topic continued to be studied and looked at. So what prompted me to get into this again this month, I guess in August, most recently, back on August 8th, I did the first research update on what color is the parchment. Then I did another one on August 15th on is Simonides trustworthy? I did one last Sunday on conspiracies, Ouspensky, and an earthquake. And then I'm going to do a fourth one today talking about a few other issues related to this, okay? So if I'm looking at my audience, I see a lot of people that are probably like, what in the world is he talking about? I don't know how familiar some of you are with this, but this is a very sort of hot button issue right now within sort of the pro-King James movement, if I could say it that way, on whether or not Codex Sinaiticus is a 19th century forgery. So I'd read some stuff that made me think it may have been back a number of years ago. Then I'm like, maybe it's not, pump the brakes on it. What prompted me last month to start talking about this was the release of a book by David Daniels from Chick Publications entitled Who Faked the World's Oldest Bible, or something along those lines. And I read the book hoping that Daniels was going to address some of the issues that were raised by Kevin McGrain and others related to it not being a 19th century forgery, but just a corrupt old manuscript or old document. And so I was a little disappointed that more of that wasn't covered in the book. In fact, it wasn't really touched on at all. And so after reading that book, I'm like, I should probably really update people on kind of where I'm at with this issue, okay? So let me be clear again. I've tried to be clear about this in all three of the previous studies I did last month and today. It doesn't matter to me whether Codex Sinaiticus is a 19th century forgery or an old corruption. I don't accept it as a viable witness to the reliability of the New Testament text. Whether it's new or old, I reject it, okay? Because of its contents, the nature of its readings when compared against the preserved text or the traditional text. So it doesn't matter to me if it's an old, corrupt document or if it's a modern forgery. And it never has, and I've said that way back when I first talked about this in June of 2017. So, in the 3 studies that we did last month, first of all, again, I talked about the parchment color. We went over a bunch of stuff about that. Then I talked about whether or not Simonides is trustworthy. Then we looked last Sunday at conspiracies, Uspensky, and an earthquake. And this morning, what I want to do is I'm going to continue following some of the issues that are raised by Kevin McGrain, and I want to talk about 3 more things briefly. I want to talk first about Kallinikos, which I'll explain here in a second. I want to talk about the Shepherd of Hermas, which is found in Codex Sinaiticus, and then I also want to talk about the Epistle of Barnabas. All right, so we're going to talk about those 3 things, and then that'll pretty much wrap up everything that I'm thinking about this at this time. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Constantine Tischendorf, he discovered, so-called discovered, Codex Cyanaticus at St. Catherine's Monastery in 1844, and he took 43 leaves or pages back with him to Germany, and at that time he gave them as a gift to Prince Frederico Augustinus of Germany, and he called it Codex CFA, Codex Frederico Augustinus, and he didn't tell anybody where he got it from. He goes back to St. Catherine's Monastery again in 1853, and he gets nothing. And then he goes back again in 1859, this time under the auspices of the Russian Tsar, because St. Catherine's Monastery was a Russian Orthodox monastery, and that's when he finds the remaining 315 leaves, and he brings them back as a gift to the Tsar of Russia. And then eventually he publishes these things, and they become known as, Tischendorf basically calls it Codex Cyanaticus as a result of where he found it from, okay? So that happens in 1859. Shortly thereafter, Constantine Simonides sees the published extracts of what Tischendorf found in 1859, and he goes to the British, he starts talking at first privately to certain people in Britain. Simonides is a Greek who's in Britain for the purpose. He's been hired by a British guy named Mayer to go through a cache of ancient documents that Mayer had bought for his library. So Simonides is in Britain for that purpose, and he starts to kind of leak to some folks and to some scholars in Britain the fact that what Tischendorf found isn't old because he created it. And he goes public to the Guardian newspaper in 1862. Let me make sure that's right, though. I believe it is. It's either September 1862 or 1863. And what Simonides claims is that he made the Codex at Mount Athos, Greece, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1840 to 1841. And so he's claiming now in the British press that what Tischendorf has discovered in 1859 and is passing off as this great uncial document of ancient antiquity, possibly, quote, the world's oldest Bible, that it's not really old and that he made it as a designed gift for the Tsar of Russia from his Uncle Benedict, who was a bigwig in the monastery, one of the monasteries at Mount Athos. And the scheme, according to Simonides, was that he would create the Codex, they would present it as a gift to the Tsar of Russia, who would then turn around and gift a printing press to the monastery, because they had a bunch of ancient documents and stuff that they wanted to get into print. So Simonides comes on the scene and he starts making this claim in the early 1860s, okay? Now, what he does is, then we should back up. When he does this, does he already have a known reputation as a forger, a liar, and all sorts of other things in Europe? Okay, we talked about back in study number 2 here from August 15th about how Simonides was instrumental in that issue with the American missionary in Greece. What was his name? I'm now drawing a blank. Do you remember? Let me look it up. Just give me a second. Why can I not remember his name? Do you have it written down, Mike? It's the guy who, this is known all the way into the American government. They talked about it in Congress. They dispatched warships to the Mediterranean to deal with the issues that were kicked up as a result of this. I'm drawing a blank now on the guy's name. I apologize. But anyway, Simonides is a known forger, he's a known liar, etc. And then he shows up in Britain, in the British press, claiming to be the true author of Codex Cyanaticus. And then that was debated in the British press for a period of about, depending on how you want to count the time, anywhere between a year to 18 months. The scholarly world accused him of being a liar. They didn't accept his claim. And a few people did, but most didn't. And so this has kind of been a debated thing. Now, this whole conversation about whether the Codex was a 19th century forgery lay dormant until about 2009. What happened in 2009 is something called the Codex Sinaiticus project, where the entire Codex was digitized and put online as a joint effort between the British University, the University of Leipzig, and here you can see right here the cooperating institutions. So the British Library, the National Library of Russia, St. Catherine's Monastery, and Leipzig University. So all four of these institutions are involved in the Codex Sinaiticus project. And the idea, and you can see right here, it says experience the oldest Bible. So that's still the claim for Codex Sinaiticus, is that it's the world's oldest Bible. And they're saying so right there on their website, okay? So anyway, this whole conversation about it being a 19th century forgery or not was dormant until about 2009, when this website was put together. And the reason for that is this has on it full color images of the digital images of the actual codex. So here you can see a fragment of a page. The whole document was photographed and then uploaded to this website. And now that people have been able to actually look at it themselves, this has caused quite a stir about what's really going on with the manuscript or with the codex, okay? So that's me trying to get everybody in here who maybe doesn't have a clue what I'm talking about up to speed in about 10 minutes, okay? So I'm sure you probably have questions still, but I need to move on with the story. So back here in 1862, as Simonides is debating all of this in the press, he starts to introduce letters by a monk named Kallinikos. Okay? Kallinikos is conveniently confirming everything that Simonides is saying. So Simonides introduces letters to the British press that are allegedly sent to him from this guy Kallinikos. Okay? Who just so happened to be present at all of the necessary points in time to verify major aspects of what Simonides is saying. Okay? So I'm going to read from McGrain's essay here. And again, this essay is a review of Forging Codex Sinaiticus by Dr. William Cooper against a detailed background of the discovery of the Codex by Kevin McGrain. This was published in 2018, and I'm going to read from page 74. And I'll tell you as we move on with this. So, into the controversy that Simonides stoked in the English press appeared his supposed correspondent, Kallinikos. This Kallinikos states that he witnessed Simonides writing the manuscript at Penteleon Monastery on Mount Athos in 1840. So, conveniently, Kallinikos now sends a letter saying that he saw Simonides at Mount Athos Monastery in 1840 writing the Codex. So Kallinikos sends a letter to Simonides. Simonides has the letter published. The letter is claiming that he was there in 1840 when Simonides was writing the manuscript. Okay, and that he witnessed Tischendorf making off with the Codex in 1844. So according to this Kallinikos, he was at Athos in 1840 and saw Simonides making the manuscript. And he just so happened to also be there in 1844 when Tischendorf took the first 43 leaves from St. Catherine's Monastery in the middle of the desert on the Arabian Peninsula. Okay? So according to Kallinikos, he was there in 1840 when Simonides made the manuscript, and he was also there in 1844 when Tischendorf took the first 43 leaves back to Germany. So he just so happened to be in both places at those exact times. Okay, let's go on. Still reading from page 74. So, and that he witnessed Tischendorf making off with part of the Codex in 1884 at St. Catherine's Monastery and mutilating the remainder of it in 1859. So not only was Kallinikos there when it was made in 1840, not only was he there in 1844 when Tischendorf took the last 4 pages, but he just so also happened to be at St. Catherine's Monastery in 1859 when Tischendorf found the rest of it. Now listen, to me that's all just a little too convenient. This guy could have been anywhere, and he just so happens to be at these exact places at the exact times he needs to be there to see everything happening to the manuscript, right? So let's go on. How remarkable that he should be. So this is what McGrain says. How remarkable that he should be in exactly the right place at the right time. Dr. Cooper, with others, views Kallinikos as corroborating Simonides' account. But it's not difficult to demonstrate that in the lives of Simonides that he is corroborating, and that Kallinikos was not an independent witness. For example, in a letter to the Guardian in December 1862, Kallinikos wrote, so by the way, that is the right year, 1862, okay? So I have all these dates flying around in my mind, so I apologize for that. So, for example, in a letter to the Guardian in December 1862, Kallinikos wrote, "For I myself saw him," referring to Simonides, "with my own eyes in February 1840, writing it in Athos, and owning to the death of the head of the monastery, he left the work unfinished and went to Constantinople, taking the Codex with him." This is just parroting what Simonides had already written. But as we have seen, and is historically verifiable, the Penteleon Monastery, so that's the monastery there on Mount Athos, had the same head from 1821 until 1875. Now that's a whole point I'm not going to get into and cover. It's an important point, but I don't want to get into that. The falsity supports the identity switch invented by Simonides, so the conclusion becomes evident that the credibility of this witness is shattered. Many other examples can be multiplied and will be given elsewhere. Simonides invented Kallinikos of Thessaloniki to concoct false biographical material about himself, and for 7 rather scrappy lithograph manuscripts that Kallinikos supposedly published in Russia between 1853 and 1854, in which Simonides is portrayed as a doctor of philosophy and a knight. And as Farrar states, Kallinikos is said to have lithographed at Moscow in 1853 and at Odessa in 1854 certain letters between himself and Simonides and the patriarch Constantius, wherein repeated allusion is made to the Codex prepared by Simonides for the Tsar. 2 of the lithographs purport to be letters sent by Simonides from Mount Sinai in April 1852 during one of Simonides' 3 fictitious visits, because there are simply manuscript lithographs with no typeset printed that they could have created anywhere at any time, and the evidence indicates that they were forged between October 1862 and March 1863. So there's a whole lot we could get into here, but those who are supportive of the 19th century forgery view are heavily reliant on Kallinikos, which conveniently enough happens to be at all the right spots at the right time, and writes in his letters almost word for word things that would corroborate Simonides' story. Okay? So, let me see if there's anything else I want to say about that. So, anybody have any questions about this? I feel sorry for you visitors. You're probably like, what in the world is he talking about?
Was Kallinikos traveling with the guy, or was he always at Mount Athos? Or at that monastery where it happened?
Well, that's the point, Bart, is the following. This guy now now starts to send so-called letters to Simonides, okay? In those letters, he claims to have been there in 1840 when it was made. He claims to have been, so this would have been on Mount Athos, Greece. He claims to have been present in 1844 when Tischendorf found the first 43 leaves and made off to Germany with them. He claims to have also been present in 1859 when Tischendorf found the last, and that he saw Tischendorf aging or mutilating the Codex to make it appear what? Old. Which goes back to the point that we talked about on August 8th about what color is the parchment. And we've talked about that a couple different times, okay? So, what McGrain is saying is, this is just all too convenient. That now all of a sudden Simonides has this correspondent who's now writing letters and corroborating different parts of the story when there's little evidence that this guy probably was there. Now, what they're going to do is they're going to, and I have a copy of this at home, they're going to produce a log, or there was a Greek scholar named Spiro Lampros, is how I say his name, that's probably wrong, but he went to Mount Athos later in the 1800s, and he documents manuscripts that were in the monasteries on Mount Athos, and published them in a catalog. And in that catalog, around a certain time, there is an entry for a guy named Simonides and a guy named Kallinikos within the same space of time, which seems to suggest that there was a guy named Simonides and there was a guy named Kallinikos, but whether or not that's the same Kallinikos is another matter. Okay, and McGrain talks about all of that. I'm not going to get into all of that part of it because it's very integral and involved, but I just want to read this next part. Kallinikos was very useful to corroborate Simonides' tales and invent a false backstory for him, and of course Simonides could and did put libelous comments under his name. He had learned a hard lesson that affixing his own name to diabolical lies when living persons, as though an eyewitness, as he had done to Jonas King. That was the missionary, Jonas King. The American missionary Jonas King was a missionary to Greece, and Simonides accused him of all manner of very sick things that this guy was doing in an attempt to get the witness of the gospel expelled out of Greece. Accused him of having orgies in his house and all sorts of things, right? And so this raised a lot of issues in Greece, and this was known even into the American Congress, and I talked about that in this study right here, August 15th. So let me go back. So he had learned a hard lesson that affixing one's name to diabolical lies about living persons as though an eyewitness, as he had done to Jonas King and others in Athens in the 1840s, could land one with some unfavorable results. But Kallinikos, his invented correspondent, was conveniently always on the move all over Africa, Asia, and Europe, and could never be traced, and thus could say whatever he liked, pretending to be an eyewitness. Simonides made appeal to the importance of his title of Kallinikos of Thessaloniki as a witness, and used his imaginary Kallinikos not only to accuse Tischendorf of being a thief and stupid and unable to read Greek, but also to declare as a supposed eyewitness that with inconceivable recklessness he mutilated and tampered with the Codex according to his liking in the year 1859. Some of the leaves he destroyed, and that he used a solution of herbs to fade the ink. In one of these Kallinikos letters, we see the familiar tone of Simonides against Jonas King being repeated, this time against Tischendorf, quote, "The master and pupil of all guile and all wickedness, the German Tischendorf, deceives the world by his reputation. Now, this thy business, i.e. Simonides, to prove and proclaim the man's real character and to show how different it is from what it appears to be." Here, Simonides, through Kallinikos, is indulging in self-justification, justifying his attacks on Tischendorf as though at the instigation and encouragement of a holy man, Kallinikos, i.e. himself. It is very regrettable that Dr. Cooper has been taken in by the deceptions of Simonides and thus repeats his libels. So, my point here is, The evidence seems to suggest that not only that Kallinikos is not a real person, that he's a person that Simonides has made up to insert into the debate, into the British press, to try to corroborate certain points in his story. Okay? So
he was never interviewed, he only had letters?
This guy was never interviewed by anybody in the press.
Yeah.
He's moving all over, nobody can ever find him, conveniently.
Convenient, yeah.
Yeah. And so, now, this was a common name. It probably, just like Simonides, frankly, was a common Greek name. So there probably are 1 million Kallinikoses running around, and 1 million Simonides running around. So, that's that point. Anybody have any questions about that point? So, what I would say is what we're doing now is we're stacking evidence together, right? If he's not trustworthy, and he's a proven liar on other things, now the whole idea that this is a 19th century forgery is totally dependent on the testimony of this one guy. It's all hinging on whether or not Simonides is telling the truth. If he's telling the truth, then obviously he'd be right, and it is a 19th century forgery. But if he's not telling the truth, then he's doing all of this for his own purposes, and now he's inventing correspondence to support things in the story that he needs to have supported. Okay? And like I said before, good liars will always have enough truth in there. So when he's naming names, for example, and he's talking about the Archbishop of Constantinople at that time, the Greek Orthodox bishop in Constantinople, Constantius, and he's naming all these names. I myself have gone to the internet and proved that all that, he's telling the truth about all that stuff. Which made me think he was telling the truth about everything. Okay? But then when you look at other data and other factoids, if you will, you start to wonder if whether or not he's telling the truth. And like I said, Bart, it doesn't matter to me if it's a 19th century forgery or if it's an old corrupt manuscript. I've never accepted it as a reliable witness to the New Testament text. Okay?
Now, the motivation is, this is the whole Bible in these texts, right? So is the Old Testament accurate because there's no motivation to change that? Motive to change the New Testament?
All right, so it's a whole Bible-ish.
Oh, okay.
There are still some parts missing. It's a terrible copy because, and I don't have this in front of me, so I'm going off of memory, so I might get it wrong. But he's like, whoever the scribe is copying in the book of Esther, and on the same line, all of a sudden jumps to like some prophet and starts copying that. So there are massive mistakes in it, okay? It's an Old Testament in Greek, which means it's a Septuagint. It's not even the Old Testament in Hebrew, okay? And it's not a totally complete Old Testament. It's and it includes apocryphal books in it too. It includes Sirach and Old Testament apocryphal books in it. In the New Testament, I believe the New Testament is relatively complete, but it has New Testament apocrypha in it as well, which is going to lead me to my next point. It has the Shepherd of Hermas in it, and it also has the Epistle of Barnabas in it. So, and these are reasons why, you know, a lot of the guys who are arguing that it's a 19th century view will say, well, this is a Catholic conspiracy to get the Apocrypha and all this stuff in the Bible and so on and so forth. And like I said to you last week, when we were talking about in this lesson right here from August 29, Conspiracies, Uspensky, and an Earthquake, it is true historically that the Catholic Church has been involved in conspiracies and that the Jesuits have been used to try to accomplish certain things and to stop Protestantism and thwart its spread, okay? So there's no doubt that's happened. The question is, though, is that what happened here? Okay, is that what happened here? All right. So there's I want to focus on these two issues right here, Hermas and Barnabas. Okay. So I'm going to go to page 79 in McGrain, and he's got an entry here about all this. There's more said here. I don't have time to cover all of it, but this document is going to be linked in the description under this video, so anybody could go and read it and check it out for themselves. So I want to move on to the Shepherd of Hermas. We've got about 15 minutes to cover both these points, so we'll see what we can do. In respect to the Greek editions of those works associated with Simonides, we first address the Shepherd of Hermas. Dr. Cooper writes on page 42 that, quote, in 1855, Simonides turned up in Leipzig University bearing a Greek text of an apocryphal work known as the Shepherd of Hermas. No one had ever seen a Greek text of this work before. So Cooper's saying that Simonides also happens to turn up in Germany in 1855 with a Greek copy of Hermas, and no one had ever seen Hermas in Greek, according to what according to what Cooper's saying. Readers will know by now that this assertion is false, because Codex Cyanaticus was studied in considerable detail was studied in considerable detail in 1845 by Ouspensky. So in 1845, put this in here, was the Russian Orthodox monk Porphyry Ouspensky in St. Catherine's Monastery looking at the Codex. So a statement that no one had ever seen it in Greek before is demonstrably false. Because he did, and he was there, and he wrote about it. That he saw a wide sheet on a certain colored parchment in, I think, what? He identifies the columns, and he talks about the fact that it had Hermas and Barnabas in it. No other ancient Greek manuscript that has ever been discovered meets that description except one, Codex Sinaiticus. So here you've got Cooper saying, no one had ever seen this Hermas before, but Ouspensky was there and saw it and described it in 1845. Okay, so readers will know by now that this assertion is false because Codex Sinaiticus was studied in considerable detail in 1845 by Ouspensky, who noted that it contained the Shepherd of Hermas, and he published that finding. Thus, the great Russian scholar had seen it 10 years before 1855. But more fundamentally, if no one had ever seen a Greek text of this work before 1855, then how could Simonides, a mere boy, allegedly have copied it in 1840 at Mount Athos? More particularly, if we take the accounts of Simonides and Kallinikos, his invented correspondent, at face value, then a large number of persons, including Orthodox patriarchs, saw the Greek version of the Shepherd of Hermas in Simonides' manuscript well before 1855. Dr. Cooper here positioned himself on the horns of a dilemma. For if he chooses to believe Simonides/Kallinikos, then the assertion that no one had ever seen a Greek text of this work before 1855 cannot be true. Alternatively, if he will assert that no one had ever seen a Greek text of this work before 1855, then it follows that Simonides and Kallinikos can't be believed. You following that? Okay? Back in the real world, the first time that Simonides saw a Greek copy of the Shepherd of Hermas was in 1851 on his second visit to Mount Athos. Debarred by the head of the monastery from entering Pantaleon Monastery Library, he visited the monastery of St. Gregory on Athos and there found a copy, now known as the Athos manuscript, for which he tore out and stole 3 leaves and made a fair manuscript transcription of the remainder, for which he made a deliberately corrupt version to sell. And it was this that he turned up with in Leipzig in 1855 with an interest in making some money, as Robinson also tells, quote, that once famous forger Constantine Simonides had produced from Mount Athos almost the whole of the book in Greek. Part of this proved to be merely his own translation of the Latin, but the larger part had actually come from a Greek manuscript. With the text taken from this manuscript, however, he had played extraordinary tricks, doubtless with the intention of finding a later purchaser for the true copy which he was keeping back. It took 30 years to clear up their confusion which Simonides had made, and it was a strange interest that I myself look back to the year 1888, when I published a collation of Athos Codex in conjunction with Professor Spiridon Lambros of Athens, who I mentioned earlier. When Lambros came to examine the Athos manuscript during the compilation of his famous Athos catalog, he confirmed that the 3 leaves of Hermas that Simonides had sold in Leipzig were torn out of the one that he had in front of him from 1851. Okay? Now, there's more that could be said about that, but I don't have time to get into it. So, in other words, Simonides is associated with this in 1855, trying to sell a fake one so that he presents one that's fake, keeping this one back, and he got the first 3 chapters of Hermas by ripping it out of the one that he found in Greece on Mount Athos in 1851, and Lambros and this other gentleman that I just quoted from give independent confirmation that when they looked at the one on Athos in 1888 to do the catalog, guess what was missing? The first 3 chapters. Indicating that Simonides did what? Stolen. Okay? Okay, the Epistle of Barnabas. Simonides, so Barnabas, when I originally taught this, and guys, I can't talk and spell at the same time. Barnabas, sound it out, Bryan. Barn. Is that right? That's right, it's close enough, right, Amy? Okay. So I originally taught this, that Barnabas was the smoking gun. That Barnabas was the one that gave away the thing that Simonides wrote it. Okay? So let's see what McGrain has to say about this, page 82. This one I'm probably going to have to jump around a little bit. Simonides learned in mid-1859 that Codex Sinaiticus contained both the Epistle of Barnabas and the first part of the Shepherd of Hermas in Greek. From 1860 onwards, Simonides started adjusting his personal history in order to prepare his claims for having written Codex Sinaiticus himself, including these books. This he did by inventing books, correspondence, and fake documentation to move his birth date back from 1824. So one of the things he's got to do is he's got to move his birth date back from 1824 back to 1820. Now, why would that be? To make himself older than he was in 1840 when he's making the manuscript. Because otherwise, you're going to have like a 12-year-old kid or something like that forging the greatest codex the world's ever seen. No one's going to believe that. So, and by the way, in 1859, a British gentleman named Stuart had published the biography of Constantine Simonides, in which it was claimed that his birth date was 1824. But now that Tischendorf has discovered this in 1859, Simonides needs to conveniently find a way to move his birth date back to make him older than he really was in 1840. You following this? This is all very convoluted, okay? So back to what I was reading. So this he did by inventing books, correspondence, and fake documentation to move his birth date back from 1824 to 1820, so that he appeared older and more experienced when at Mount Athos in 1840, and to have received his PhD at age 22. B, to eradicate his long time in Russia, so that he could be back at Mount Athos in 1843. C, to fit his 3 trips to St. Catherine's Monastery just prior to Tischendorf's 3 visits. D, to include invented, revised details in publications which forged earlier dates. And E, to set up false, invented witnesses to his activities. This would involve counteracting many of the biographical details recently put out in 1859 in the biographical memoir, that was one published by Stuart, required something more sophisticated than forging a new birth certificate. Simonides had to invent plausible stories and quote evidence how he could have copied Greek texts of Barnabas and Hermas into the Codex in 1840. Now, let me just back up and say, the gist of Brother David Daniel's new book is basically to say that Simonides was telling the truth, and that all of this stuff, all these moving pieces that we're talking about right now are completely explainable, and to demonstrate that Simonides did in fact write the Codex. And he does not deal with any of this information that is being put out here by Kevin McGrain into the public space. Hermas was relatively easy because serendipitously he himself had discovered a Greek text of Hermas on Athos in 1851, which, though somewhat different from the Sinaitic text, was from the same recension. It was doubly fortunate that the text in Sinaiticus was only the first part of the book, because then no problems need arise concerning the ending, which was also missing in the manuscript that Simonides transcribed in 1851. So, having brought the text to the attention of scholars in Leipzig in 1855, the first time these scholars had seen a copy of most of the book in Greek, supported by 3 of the leaves which he had stolen from the manuscript, many scholars, including Tischendorf, had given him the benefit of the doubt that such a manuscript had long existed on Athos. Simonides judged that this was sufficient to underpin his story that the text had been available on Athos for him to copy in 1840, but that he only wrote the first part of the book because he ran out of parchment in the Codex. So, but what did he do with the Epistle of Barnabas? 2 independent scholarly editions of the Greek text appeared in 1857, but were missing the first chapters. No complete Greek text of Barnabas was known by Western scholars, and Simonides had not hitherto mentioned that he had ever seen a copy. How could Simonides therefore have written Barnabas and Codex Cyanaticus as he alleged, when no Greek text of the whole epistle was known to exist in the West before 1859, nor published until 1862? It was solving this problem that gave rise to 2 ingenious forgeries, this time in printed form rather than manuscript, and it gives us a fascinating window into the lengths Simonides would go to support the Codex Cyanaticus narrative. Okay, so I'm going to jump off from reading that, and I'm going to try to explain this without reading it. So, as part of his story, in 1862-63, he claims that in 1843 he published in Greece a copy of Barnabas in Greek. So has anyone? And by the way, before these years, he never said anything about this Greek Barnabas. Never talked about it. Never said anything about it. And the scholars, that are into this stuff, they've never even seen one. And there's not even one published until, what was the year I just read? 1862. Okay. So let me grab a couple things here. So this was the Star of the East newspaper. The Star of the East newspaper was a legitimate paper that ran in Greece, and I'm going to turn to the pages where McGrain talked about the Star of the East, so bear with me for a second. So I'm reading on page 90. Several Greek language newspapers started up and closed down in Smyrna in the 1840s. Fortunately, there are good records of them. Though the title, Star of the East, was published and printed in Smyrna, having its first issue on October 17, 1841. Okay? So I'll tell you why this is important. So a lot of dates here. Okay? 1841, you've got the Star of the East newspaper. It's published in 1841. I said October, didn't I?
Yeah.
Did I say October?
I think so.
It's published in October 1841. Where was that? Okay. And it ceased publication in the middle of 1842. So this paper runs for a little less than a year. Star of the East. It was a legitimate paper in Smyrna, and it ran for about a little less than a year. So reading again from page 90. Though the title Star of the East was published and printed in Smyrna, having its first issue on October 17, 1841, it ceased publication in mid-1842, so that there certainly were no editions in 1843. The paper had already gone belly up before the end of 1842. Okay? This is a real masthead of the paper. I know most of you can't read this, but Star of the East, and the date on here is 42, and you can see this is a three-column newspaper, and that paper ran in Smyrna, Star of the East, from October 1841 until the middle of 1842, all right? So, as part of his scheme here, Simonides is going to turn up now in this whole debate with a copy of the Star of the East newspaper conveniently dated to 1843. After the paper would belly up according to public records. So, what did he do with the newspaper? The indication is that he what? That he forged it. So I have a little bit of a funny story. I can't remember which university this was, but when I was tracking things down, I wrote to one university in Greece and another university in Thessaloniki, what would be Thessalonica, asking for images of these things that have been entered into their records. And the guy says to me, why do all of you Yankees care about Simonides all of a sudden? So what that told me is a bunch of people were now trying to track all this stuff down because they wanted to see it for themselves, okay? But anyway, let's go back to this. Neither did the title start up again, nor did the publication with some similar name emerge in the 1840s. Dr. Cooper reproduces an image of the front page of the first edition, dated October 17, 1841, but this cannot, of course, prove that an edition was produced more than a year after the publication folded. In this photograph of the first issue, in fact, this photograph of the first issue proves too much, as we shall see. How then does something non-existent bear witness to a, quote, solid historical fact? This shall never prevent a difficulty for the conspiracy theorist, Dr. Cooper, that the total lack of evidence anywhere for the existence of the editions of the Star of the East after May 1842 is part of the conspiracy. For all the evidence has been deliberately removed, mutilated, or disappeared from the public record, according to what Cooper is saying. Would it not have been appropriate to check whether the newspaper had ceased publication before making such statements? Unsurprisingly, Dr. Cooper gives no evidence whatsoever for his assertions. Neither can he, since no one can remove and make to disappear something that never existed. But Simonides had already anticipated matters. He produced an edition of Barnabas with a fake date. And for those who might question its date and placed the publication, he supplied a sheet carrying a review of the purported manuscript to come out of the Star of the East, dated August 1st, 1843. So not only does Simonides, according to McGrain, not only does he fake a Barnabas, backdated to 1843, but that he publishes a review of it in the Star of the East paper, dates it to August 1st, 1843, proving too much. And I want you to see also, this is a double column.
Right.
The real Star of the East that we have a legitimate photograph of is a what? Is a three column. When this first started being discussed, I asked one of the guys that was in this, I say, well, what do you do about the fact that the Star of the East here is a three column, but the Simonides one is only a two column, and I got really no answer for that. Okay? But Simonides has already anticipated, and by the way, I can show you also so there's the whole page. So his thing starts like right here, his review of Barnabas, or is it here? I can't remember where exactly, but it's on this page. And here's his copy of Barnabas with the date what? 1843 put on it. Okay? So I got to move quick. But Simonides has already anticipated matters. He had produced an edition of Barnabas with a fake date. That's this right here that I'm showing you. And for those who might question its date and place of publication, he supplied a sheet carrying a review of it purporting to come from the Star of the East. So that's this one right here. Dated August 1st, 1843. Dr. Cooper suggests how improbable it would be for Simonides to forge a complete edition of the newspaper and hopes thereby to disprove the objection that he supplied was a forgery. A copy of the alleged review in the Genedarius library and purports to be a supplement of the newspaper edition number 26, August 1st, 1843. So that's this. This is in the Genedarius library, and you can see what's the page number on this. It says 423. Okay? That's going to be important here in a second. It is not even a large sheet folded as a bifolium like a newspaper. So that's this right here. It's not even a large sheet. It's just a standalone sheet. So you know how you get the newspaper and it's folded in half? Okay? It's not even folded in half. It is not even a large sheet folded as a bifolium like a newspaper, but as a single sheet, one leaf printed on both sides. Producing one single sheet of this size would have been a straightforward job for any decent printer, and who, after all, supplied the forged reviews to parties interested in seeing Simonides' Barnabas edition? None other than Simonides. But a supplement to issue number 26, dated August 1st, 1843, never existed, and of that we can be certain. As evidence from the image of that Dr. Cooper provides in his book, the first edition of this title was October 17, 1841, and being a weekly publication, issue 26 came out as expected on April 10, 1841. Okay? Just to be... What?
42 or 41?
That's a misprint. It's got to be 42. Yes, good catch. Just to be clear about this, we exhibit below the masthead of the subsequent issue, 27, on April 17, 1842. So yes, that was a misprint. This evidence forever closes any glimmer of an issue 26 in 1843. So Simonides and his forgery proving too much. Okay? Simonides took great delight in trying to make fools of academics, and he is still making fools of those who thinks his forgeries are genuine 160 years later. In this particular case, Simonides deliberately included certain clues in his forged review sheet for his own merriment, including the following. Number one, Simonides most implausibly put his initials at the end of the previous article in this fake supplement sheet immediately prior to the review of his book. So I don't remember where that showed up here. Right here. Those are Simonides' initials right before the review of Barnabas, alleged review of Barnabas. Second, though the weekly edition was only a bifolia, making an eight-page newspaper, which does not bear page numbering, Simonides' fake supplement sheet bears the incredible page numbers. It does say 225. It's rubbed off. 225, and if you look at the other side, 425 and 426. So obviously those are the page never ran. The newspaper never ran more than 8 pages. So each edition, it was published every week. Each edition was 8 pages. Where's 425 and 426 coming from? From a newspaper that went defunct a year and a half earlier, or a year earlier at least. Number 3.
Was he trying to date it like it had continued?
Yeah.
Would that have worked out with those numbers or not?
No.
Okay.
Because of the way but it wouldn't have worked out with the issue number, and it wouldn't have worked out with the page number, is what McGrain's saying. The weekly edition, while it ran, was produced and sold on a Friday. However, the date of Simonides' fake review, August 1st, 1843, is for a newspaper edition produced and sold on a Sunday. So August 1st, 1843 was a Sunday, not a Friday, and all the documented history we have on the Star of the East newspaper, when it ran, it was released every Friday. Which is ridiculous amongst the Greek Orthodox community there and then. The review improbably refers to Simonides, who in 1843 was still a teenager with only elementary reading and writing skills, who would have excelled, who had been, expelled dishonorably from school just the year before, as, quote, the most learned and in all things noble patriot Simonides, the nephew of the famous Benedict and the successor of his wisdom, etc. So, where I'm going with this is, at every level, it seems as though Simonides, when you look at this objectively, is he definitely inventing and concocting what he thinks is necessary to pass this story off. Originally, I have to confess that I found this all to be, convincing. And if I'm honest, I probably had some confirmation bias. I think I wanted this thing to be a forgery. Okay? Because if it was a forgery, then it's a massive, it's like blowing a massive hole into the, modern critical text position if this is a 19th century forgery. So I think I kind of wanted it to be a forgery, and I believe Simonides. And what I'm saying now is I don't think I can believe Simonides at all in light of further evidence. But just because I don't believe Simonides doesn't mean I believe that it's a legitimate New Testament document, because, well, it's got Apocrypha in it. And the believing church, down through history, never accepted the Apocrypha as canonical. So whatever this thing is, not only is it a textual mess, not only are there clear mistakes in it, but it contains things that no Protestant ever accepted as Scripture in the first place. So I don't really have too much more to say about it. As you can see, I've tried to summarize this and three other articles here in these 4 lessons that I've done, the 3 previous and now today's. We are running out of time, and I have to run the devotional portion of the service today because I believe Will is celebrating his anniversary this week, but he's not going to be here. So does anybody have any questions or comments? I'm sorry for you guys that are visiting. I hope you weren't too bored by all this. If you want all the information, it's on our church website. You can start from the beginning and go all the way through with it with me. Next Sunday, we're restarting our class on the Bible issue, and we will be beginning next Sunday. I'm going to talk about the pre-Jamesian context in England as we look at the later reign of Queen Elizabeth leading into King James, to try to understand what the political and religious climate in England was on the eve of the decision to translate the King James Bible. And so we'll start looking at that next week. Okay? If you have a question, by all means, stick around. I've got to pack up this equipment, and we'll go from there. I want to thank you guys for being with